Are you a network engineer freaking out about the prospect of learning Python? Well, I'm here to tell you, yes, you have to learn Python, but you do not have to freak out about it. Stick around. So I've been crying for months now about being made to learn Python. Sirpocalypse came, automation is now in the material, so we have to learn it. I'm working on my CCMP. I got to learn automation. Great. I also have to learn automation at work. Big automation push, and it's happening. And here I am, and I'm surrounded by people who know Python, and I better get on board. Brief backstory. I failed out of computer science in college. It was one of my many majors because programming in C++ as well as calculus were beyond my reach. Couldn't do it. And that was the end of computer science and programming for me. So I had experience in my life trying and failing miserably at programming. Fast forward a couple of decades, and here I am in my career, and I have to learn programming. So to say I had a mental block, is an understatement. But I'm fortunate enough that I was enrolled in a week-long network automation bootcamp this week, hosted by the fine folks at Network to Code. And I was a bit freaked out about it for the aforementioned reasons. So last week, I dove into the Network Automation and Programmability textbook written by Jason Edelman and company. And what I did was start to employ some of the methods I've been using, some of the new methods I've been using, study methods, to study for my CCMP, notably using Anki flashcards and putting terms I don't know and concepts I don't know in those flashcards. What I found and realized was that anytime someone starts to talk about programming to me, I glaze over. And I kind of have, I'm half jokingly saying it's like a PTSD reaction of, because I failed miserably at programming in college. And now here we are talking programming. So there's these neural pathways in my brain saying you can't do it. And I also don't know what the heck they're talking about when they start to throw all these terminologies around, loops and variables and nested if you can't speak the language, how can you understand the underlying concepts that language is representing? So what I did about 5 or 6 days ago was jump into that book and start to use the Anki flashcards and put terminology that I didn't know in there. So that was a good step. And after a couple of days of reviewing those, I started to kind of remember some of these terms that I've heard hundreds of times before and just couldn't get to stick in my head. So thumbs up for Anki flashcards. So that was step one. Step two was this week sitting in this boot camp. Today was day 2, and it's a fire hose like any boot camp, and it's way too much information all at once. And I'm trying to keep up, and I'm falling behind. And I don't like that feeling. I start to get a little, fired up or anxious or nervous because I am falling behind, and maybe I'm not smart enough to do this. Why am I falling behind? But anyway, I asked a lot of questions, and I was up late last night and late tonight going through the material that I fell behind on. So I'm trying to keep up, and I'm involved. I'm working hard. I'm pounding away at the material, and I had a realization about halfway through today's class that the terminology. Here's what really happened: is the instructor was showing Python code. And all of a sudden, I realized I could understand some of it, how a list and a dictionary are different. I'm looking at the dictionary, and I see the key and the value, and and then the instructor's talking about concatenating things, and that's a term that I used to hear and just zone out. Like, what are they talking about? And I learned that all that means is adding things. If you're concatenating, you're just combining things. And okay, so I'm starting to learn the terminology, and I'm starting to recognize little bits of code and little things that are in there. And I'd always heard terms like white space and what it means, and consistency throughout your code, and tabs versus spaces. And I learned today that the best practice in Python is use 4 spaces on each line. And then the instructor was teaching us a trick on how you can create a function in, Microsoft was a Visual Studio where every time you hit tab, it gives you 4 spaces and it puts your code in blocks so that it's easier to read for us. And got into some Boolean logic, which I did take an intro to logic course in college. So I kind of knew what they were talking about a little bit, but then seeing it in the code and what you could do, and, if this condition, then do that thing. And so I really, besides starting to recognize some of the terminology that has always been foreign to me, and then when I started to see bits in the code that I started to understand, it's almost like one of those, remember those old drawings you look at and you'd have to stare at it for like, a couple minutes, and then a picture would appear. Like, it wasn't that dramatic today, but it kind of was, because all of a sudden I started, like A Beautiful Mind, that movie, like where we started to see numbers and formulas coming out of the wall. I started to understand little bits and pieces. Now, I couldn't teach Python. I couldn't show you anything now. I don't even think I can write code, but seeing other code people wrote and starting to understand bits and pieces about it, to me, was huge. So I'm just here to say, I put the Python on a pedestal. It's really caused me a lot of consternation. I've been whining about it for months because really, I think deep down, I felt that I wasn't going to be able to do it because I wasn't able to do it previously in a previous life. And every time people even start talking about it, my brain just shuts down. And because I guess I'm under an old, belief that I can't do this, but I realized today, after 5 or 6 days of banging my head into this material, that maybe I can, a little sliver of light. So, that's the takeaway for me. And I just wanted to share it because if anybody else is intimidated by learning Python, I'm a cable guy that worked his butt off to become a network engineer who's now starting to get little dribs and drabs of Python code. Like, I can understand a little bit. And I mean, if I can, anybody out there can. One other thing that hit me today, which I just wanted to share, Daniel Dib, he's a guy from Sweden on Twitter. And I saw my buddy Chris from the Discord server, It's All About the Journey. He retweeted a blog post from Daniel Dib, and the whole idea was that you should look at your career as a marathon, not a sprint. And he made the analogy to sports and how if you run a marathon like a sprint, what'll happen? It's not good, and you're not going to make it. Having been an athlete in high school, it kind of stuck and it jumped in there, and I started to relate, and it was in my head. And I'm like, oh yeah, it's because what happens for me is, like, right now the industry's changing. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of new things to learn, and I act as if I need to learn it all at once and all of it quickly, because if I don't, something terrible is going to happen, right? But I'm going to be working a long time, at least 20 more years. And when I try to learn everything at once, I freak myself out. I get all spun up, and then my prefrontal cortex shuts down and I can't learn anything. So reading Daniel's blog post and internalizing that and realizing that, what? I can learn all this, but I can't learn it all at once. I've been working at Python for 6 days, and I'm starting to get a little bit of it. It hasn't taken me away from my CCNP studies because there's an automation section. So actually studying automation specifically is actually going to help me in my NP. So, I have that thought process in my head of like, well, I can't stop studying for one thing and jump on something else, because then I won't finish that first thing. But these are actually related, which is helpful. So anyway, that's it. Don't put the Python on a pedestal, or anything for that matter that you have to learn. I seem to freak myself out about any new technology I have to learn. It's ridiculous. I'm stopping. I'm not going to do it anymore. I'm fortunate enough to be surrounded by some really good people who call me out on it. Specifically my podcast co-hosts at It's All About, I'm sorry, what's our podcast? The Art of Network Engineering. And It's All About the Journey Discord server. Now that I'm part of a community, once I start whining, people call me out on it and give me a hard time. And I realize like, oh yeah, I'm doing that old silly thing. I need to stop that and just put my head down and learn this stuff. So, we can learn anything. The power of community is incredible. My goal one day is to maybe teach a little bit of Python. That's far off, but maybe I can, maybe I can do that someday. So that's all I got. Thanks for stopping by. Take care. See you.